For all we know, Miguel and Yuta's relationship for the most part has been a simple one. The story itself hasn't really gone in depth discussing and resolving things between those two, so all we do know is that Miguel is pretty much just his sensei. And since those two haven't been student and sensei for quite long, their relationship isn't as strong as that between Gojo and his students. Besides, all of their interactions are off-screen, and at this point we've only gotten flashbacks covering crucial moments. In some of the more recent chapters, we come to realize that it was Gojo who nominated Miguel up for the position of mentoring Okotsu. But why Miguel of all people? Obviously, there's Gojo's statement talking about Miguel's physiology, but that's most definitely not the case. There is no doubt that Miguel is physically built different, no matter how you view him and Gojo's interaction. Miguel's physical toughness and durability is on a whole other level, especially when compared to others in this series. Canonically, and for all we know at least, Miguel's the only combatant that Gojo's physical prowess didn't put down for good. Jogo and Hanami did not have it easy, and Gojo was able to take out those two basically with just his physical prowess. A very similar thing would apply to one of the more recent versions of Sukuna. In Gojo and Sukuna's fights, Gojo was seen destroying Sukuna in the physical department, and after he landed a black flash, he even knocked Sukuna out for good. So the mere fact that Miguel was able to take a couple of these blow enhanced punches is no small feat, as it displays how durable he actually is. But that doesn't answer the question, why Miguel? Was there truly no better option to train Yuta? Why didn't he himself just train Yuta, or maybe even ask Yuki for a favor? After all, those two are the only special grades, at least at the time. Especially when you consider the similarities in Gojo and Yuta's abilities. Yuta has already been stated to be the second strongest sorcerer, and in certain translations he's stated to be the second sorcerer behind Satoru Gojo in terms of unusual abilities. The focus being the unusual abilities, but as we've seen, Gojo seems to think he wasn't necessarily best for the task, and so he relayed it to Miguel. Miguel explains the only reason he took Yuta in was because Gojo asked and he was indebted to Gojo. Miguel says Gojo saved him at some point. This is most likely implying that they could have ended all the curse users after they stopped Ghetto during the night parade of 100 demons. But what exactly is different with both versions of Yuta? The Yuta in Volume 0 and the Yuta who finally returned back to Japan in the Calling Games. Back in Volume 0, Yuta already had Rika, the special grade curse apparition, but with the movie's conclusion, he seemed to have lost access to her powers. And then in the same movie, we saw him utilize the copied curse technique. Besides those two, he really just relied on the fundamentals, though there was also the Yuta and Rika Loft powered energy blast. When Yuta returned to the story, we came to find out that not only was he still in possession of Rika, but now he's been equipped with a whole lot more copied curse techniques. There is a possibility that Miguel might have played a crucial role in Yuta reawakening Rika, but I doubt that's the case. After all, that isn't necessarily the way curses in JJK work. I believe Yuta was able to get back Rika through his own efforts. Besides, the narrator implied that Yuta regained Rika back within 3 months, and as we all know, Yuta has been away for a whole lot longer. As for the copied curse techniques, we might never truly get an insight on their abilities, because even now in the Calling Games, Yuta seems to rely on only the curse techniques he's copied on screen. So if he copied any curse technique in Africa, the chances that we'd be getting to see them anytime soon are honestly little to none. It's almost certain that he must have copied some curse techniques in Africa. After all, when he used his domain expansion, it's explained that those katanas present symbolize a copied curse technique. With the amount of katanas present, there is no doubt that he has a whole lot of other curse techniques that we haven't just seen him pull out. And since he spent majority of his time as a Jujutsu sorcerer away in Africa, the logical conclusion is that most of those copied techniques come from Africa. But this doesn't still give credit to Miguel, because not only do we not know the factors at play when it comes to Yuta copying a curse technique, but we also don't know what role Miguel would have played in such a situation. When Yuta acquired Uro's sky manipulation, we saw him giving a piece of Uro to Rika. It's assumed that Rika consumed the curse energy from this part, and then she was able to extract the curse technique. But this hypothesis doesn't seem to be the constant. After all, when you factor in Ishigori and Inumaki, you'll come to realize that there is probably a whole lot of other ways he can acquire a curse technique. But what if it lies there? What if it was Miguel who consciously taught him how to use his abilities? I mean, back in Volume 0, he didn't seem to know how to instinctively activate copy. It's assumed he acquired Inumaki's cursed speech because of some kind of bond. But as we've seen with another calling game player, Charles, a sorcerer who Yuta has not had any on-screen encounter with, it seems bond isn't all there is to it. So what if rather than instinctively using his copy cost technique, Miguel found a way to teach him to activate his technique consciously? This would make his technique far more versatile in the heat of battle, as we saw in Sendai Colony. But once again, there is too much assumption there. Let's not forget, Miguel's cost technique isn't exactly that diverse, so the odds of this being the case aren't exactly looking too good. In the manga, it's eventually explained that Yuta and Miguel for the most part tried their best to recover the black rope, but I doubt that's exactly what they were doing over those few months. Yes, they must have made attempts, but that couldn't be all they spent their time on. There is a possibility that Yuta's fighting style is actually inspired by sorcerers from Africa. Maybe Gojo wanted Yuta to learn sword techniques foreign to those in Japan, but that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, spending all that time just honing his sword skills. But that's not all Yuta had to hone at the time. When Yuta came back into this story, we saw that his precision with RCT and his cost energy in general was considerably leveled up. So maybe that's something he owes Miguel. Gojo has already hinted at Miguel's superior physical prowess, so it's possible that thanks to Miguel, Yuta learned to complement his relatively weak physical prowess with his insane cost energy reserves to maximize his efforts when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. And this would make a whole lot of sense when you read into his fight with Yuji. It's not that Yuta is physically strong, but it's the way he reinforces his attacks, his body with his cost energy. But once again, it's unlikely that learning reinforcement is all he did in all those months. But you know what? There's something in Miguel's abilities that might have actually played a role into buffing Yuta's arsenal. When Gojo explains Miguel's abilities to Yuta, Gojo explicitly states that Miguel's abilities is very similar to that of the simple domain. The simple domain being a barrier technique much like the domain expansion. Gojo says that Miguel's abilities basically buff him and debuff his opponents, much like most other barrier techniques, and Miguel is able to do this without summoning up a barrier and without the use of a binding vow, and that's probably where the truth lies. You see, the biggest difference between the Yuta from back in volume 0 and the Yuta we are currently seeing face Sukuna has to be his domain expansion. Yuta's domain happens to be one of the more complex expansions we've seen in the series so far. Yes, it uses a barrier unlike that of Sukuna's and Kenjaku, but when it comes to the sure hit and a lot of other conditions, it's not as simple. I believe it was here that Miguel played a crucial role. It's very possible that Miguel helped Yuta set up conditions as well as the sure hits, and maybe in his ventures in Africa, he was able to fully realize himself. After all, it's only the fully realized sorcerers who end up expanding their domains at some point. With the complexity that comes with changing and switching one's sure hits, as well as the binding vows that Yuta must have set in place to enable this function in such a manner, it's very possible that was something Gojo just couldn't bring himself to teach, so he decided to delegate the responsibility to someone else. But it's also very possible that none of this is the case in the end. After all, Miguel and Yuta don't seem to be all that too close. But in the end, these are all just theories and speculation. As JJK is already wrapping up, we'd probably soon be getting to know what exactly unfolded back when Yuta was in Africa. And in the event that Miguel taught Yuta something else, something entirely different from what we are expecting, then it is probably my hope and the hope of a whole lot of others that such a technique or possibly trump card would end up playing a crucial role in the defeat of Sukuna. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to leave a like. If you have something you would like to add, then you can put it in the comments. And if you want to stay up to date with the channel, then please feel free to subscribe.